Before we start the meeting, I'd like to go over a few ground rules. This will be a completely virtual meeting using the Zoom webinar platform. The platform has a capacity of 100 attendees. Public participants will be muted except for the public comment portion of the meeting, where individuals wishing to comment will be unmuted individually. Members of the public can indicate their desire to provide comment either by submitting a request in advance or by using the raise hand feature of Zoom during the public comment section. A roll call will be taken at the start of the meeting to confirm all board members can hear the proceedings and be heard, and roll call votes will be taken for all motions at the meeting. Board members should use the raise hand features to indicate they would like to have the floor and should state their name before proposing or seconding a motion. As with our in-person meetings, this board meeting is being recorded and will be made available on the district website after the meeting. With that said, I will hereby call the May 11th meeting of the East Penn Board of School Directors to session. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Moving on to the first order of business, Ms. Allen, will you call the roll for attendance?
Ms. Bowman?
Present.
Mr. Byrd?
Present.
Mr. Champagne?
Present.
Mr. Jankowski?
Present.
Dr. Levinson?
Present.
Dr. Munson?
Present.
Mr. Smith?
Present.
Ms. Winch?
Present.
Dr. Bacher?
Present.
All present.
Okay. Moving forward with the request to address the board, we had one request in advance from Everett Henry regarding the opening of school next year.
Yeah. Hi, I just want to know if you guys have any, like, what kind of plans to open up schools next year. You know, my kids right now are not faring well in virtual school, and I know this was just kind of, you know, a last minute kind of thing, which, you know, everybody I think appreciates, but, you know, for my kids, they're not doing well, so I want to see, know if anybody has anything going on, like, planned for the next school year.
Thank you for your comments. We don't usually get into a dialogue in the public comment session, but the district will, I don't know if Mrs. Campbell wants to say anything. The district will post its plans on the district website. We are planning to have something different for start of next year than what we're, our continuity of learning plan is for this year.
Thank you. I'll just briefly mention that first and foremost, we appreciate the feedback, and all of us, like you, are certainly already have our minds on the start of next school year. We recognize that it is very likely that it will look different than any other start to the school year for us. Our central office administrative teams, as well as our building teams, will be involved in now actually planning what the start of next school year will be, recognizing that we need to be prepared for the fact that we may have to reduce the number of students that can physically be present in buildings at any given time to adhere to social distancing protocol. We also recognize that there is a possibility that students will have to continue with some sort of online instruction. And so while we're not at this point ready this evening to share an overview of those plans, I can assure you that we are continuing to plan for the start of next school year, and that at a future meeting, we will bring an overview of our elementary, middle, and high school plans for both the board as well as the community.
Thank you, Mrs. Campbell. I do not see any participants with their hands raised, so we'll continue on to the next order of business, which is approval of minutes. Mrs. Allen, you call the roll. Oh, wait, do we have to do a motion?
Joshua Levinson, so moved.
Elise
Ziad Munson, second. Sorry.
Is there any discussion? Mrs. Allen, will you call the roll, please?
Mr. Byrd,
Yes.
Mr. Champagne,
Yes.
Mr. Jankowski,
Aye.
Dr. Levinson,
Aye.
Dr. Munson,
Yes.
Mr. Smith,
Aye.
Ms. Winch,
Aye.
Ms. Baumann,
Yes.
Dr. Bacher.
Aye.
9 ayes.
Motion passes. Next, we have a presentation by Mrs. Campbell and Mr. Saul on budget update.
It'd help if I was unmuted. Is everyone able to see my screen? Thumbs up?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you. Sorry for that slight delay. Our administrative team recognizes that there have been significant changes to the 2020-21 district budget based on COVID-19. In particular, we spent the majority of our budget presentation at our April 27th meeting, providing you with a detailed overview of the reduction to our revenues. And so we all recognize that the budget process today looks very different than it did 2 months ago. And based on the feedback that the board has given us, we have decided that it would be in the best interest of our organization to add a second board meeting in May. And so you'll see that we have planned for tonight. We'll continue to provide for you an update of our budget. But again, we also want to point your attention to the fact that we have added a special meeting of the school board scheduled for May 26th. And the focus of that meeting will specifically be on the budget. As of now, the vote on the final budget is still planned for June 8th, 2020. It really is our desire and our intention to keep the vote at that June 8th meeting. But we recognize that if necessary, we do have a second meeting in June that we could potentially shift that adoption to the final meeting in June if absolutely necessary. But as of now, we are comfortable with this timeline, and our goal is really to continue to share feedback with the board regarding our budget process. So I want to just briefly speak to what was shared with you at our April 27th meeting with regard to the proposed final budget. In particular, our total revenues for East Penn are at about 148 million, and our anticipated expenditures are at about 154 million, which, as we've described at our last meeting, with a 1.5% tax increase, leaves us at a budget deficit of about $6 million. Again, this is also just a high-level overview of the reduction in those revenues that Mr. Saul really delved into in great detail at the April meeting. At this point, I am going to share with the board and the public a recommendation that administration has in terms of what we're referring to as the first phase of budget reductions. But before we actually jump into the specifics of this table, I want to just make an important and probably a very obvious point for the board and the community. Anytime that an organization has to start to talk about cuts, as you can appreciate, that's a very difficult conversation, and there are many, many difficult decisions that are to be made. However, our primary goal continues to be to preserve the quality of programs and services that we offer students. And while I'm pleased to share that the initial phase of reductions does not necessarily cut district instructional, co-curricular, or extracurricular programs, of course you can appreciate that the cuts that we're making, specifically when you see some of those staffing cuts that we're proposing, without a doubt, those have an impact on our organization. In addition, we have been strategic in recognizing that some of the cost savings measures are really one-time savings and one-time strategies, while others we may realize the benefit into successive years. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time going through some of these phase 1 budget reductions with some level of detail. And as we get to some of the others, Mr. Saul is then going to pick up with presenting some of that information. So the first recommendation that we're making is to reduce our expenditures for the upcoming year, is to reduce our building and department budgets by about 10%, which you can see results in a total savings of approximately $700,000. So what that means is we have already reached out to our building principals, our department leaders, and asked them to prioritize their purchases and determine which of those are not absolutely essential for 2020-21, because as a result of reducing budgets by 10%, as you can appreciate, there are simply things that building and department leaders are not going to be able to purchase. What those things are that individuals, that leaders and teams cannot purchase will certainly vary based on the level, the building, the department. I can share with you that at our buildings, for example, many of their funds are used to purchase instructional materials and or supplies. There might be subscriptions and or some software purchases that would come out of a building budget. So we have asked our building leaders to work not just within their own level, but really as teams to make those tough decisions in terms of where they might cut in their own building and department expenses. The second item that we are proposing for reducing expenditures would be in reducing our staffing, and I'll emphasize that these reductions are through attrition. You'll note that they total about 1.2 million. And to give the board a bit more detail in terms of from where those reductions will occur, at the elementary level, we're proposing to reduce by 3 positions, which will, of course, result in larger class sizes in those particular sections. I will share that we've continued to closely monitor elementary class size and have preserved class sizes, in particular paying very close attention to those numbers in kindergarten, as well as our primary grades. I will share that the reductions that are being proposed in this particular round do impact some of our intermediate grades, and those class sizes will get a bit larger. We are also proposing that we would reduce 4 secondary positions through attrition, and we can accomplish this through some adjustments to our high school schedule. And again, these schedule changes at the high school are currently being reviewed by our high school use of time committee. We're also able to reduce support staff through attrition. Particularly, we have some students who may have had one-on-one support in their instructional programs, and those students are graduating. So those reductions in support staff can also happen through attrition. With regard to reductions in our maintenance staff, we have eliminated our summer maintenance program that we typically offer in the summer. As a result of our students not being in the building since March, we have been able to continue with our maintenance staff to come in as essential staff, and they have been able to begin some of those summer projects that potentially the summer maintenance staff would have accomplished. So we were able to eliminate that summer maintenance staff for this summer. And finally, as part of our staffing, we are also proposing that we will reassign some of the responsibilities in our technology office, which could result in a need for fewer positions. Again, those reductions would be through attrition. You'll also see that we are recommending a reduction in our contribution to capital reserve by about $500,000, as well as a reduction in fund balance by about $500,000. In just a moment, Mr. Saul is going to speak to those two items in a bit more detail, as well as also provide the board with an overview of a proposed plan for debt restructuring that could result in a cost savings of about $950,000. And then finally, you'll see a potential savings of about $100,000 specifically for professional conferences, as well as substitutes. And again, when we talk about impact of these cuts that we're making, I want to remind the board that on numerous occasions, our administrative team has emphasized that ongoing professional development is really a critical part of our vision for high quality teaching and learning. At the same time, we recognize that we will need to limit the conferences and associated travel expenses during tough financial times. In particular, we have provided substitutes for teachers who may have been absent from the classroom to attend conferences, and or any other district approved activity. When a teacher may have been out of the classroom, we have provided a substitute. So we are really looking to reduce those number of district approved conferences and activities, which would then save us in both conference and expense fees, as well as substitutes. So in total, the initial phase of recommended cuts or reductions is about $3.9 million. And again, at this point, Mr. Saul is going to pick up and talk to us in a bit more detail about some of the debt restructuring, as well as if there's anything additional, Mr. Saul, that you want to speak to in terms of the capital reserve or fund balance.
Great, thank you. I'm just making a note here. Okay, great, thank you. Yes, and these three items, perfect. Yes, that slide is what I need. These three items, the capital reserve, probably more so the debt restructuring, but also the fund balance, all sort of are interrelated with each other in the way that they ultimately play out with our budget. The first item I'll talk about is a potential debt restructuring that we could undertake in an effort to offer some short-term relief. And so sort of from a conceptual standpoint, we put together this exhibit to share with the board to see if this is something the board would entertain. So I'll start on the slide on the left. You can see above several of the sections there are numbers. So I'll start with section 1. This would be, sorry, let me back up and share something with the board members. So you may recall last, during this fiscal year, last July or August, we refinanced some bonds. And I just want to point out that that was a refinancing of debt in order to take advantage of favorable markets and get a lower interest rate in order to lower our costs. This is a debt restructuring, which is different. This actually does not generate savings the same way as the refinancing did. This really allows us to use bonds that are callable to restructure the debt to offer a relief up front. But there is a cost to that, and I'll get to that in just a minute. Okay, let me just, I got a note that my audio is, let's try this and see if this makes it better. So starting with number 1, the series, this would be the series of 2020, and it refinances a portion of the 2012 bonds. It actually wouldn't call all of them, but a good portion of those. And the assumed rate at this point is about 2%. If you look at number 2, the column there for number 2 is the fiscal year ending. And you can see this goes out to 2029, which is when actually all of our debt is paid off that we currently have. In column 3, you see the existing local effort. Local effort is our debt service payments with the state reimbursement deducted. So it's the amount that the district is actually paying out of pocket after receiving reimbursement from the state. Column 4 shows the change that would occur in terms of if we restructured this debt. So you can see there would be relief in the early years, and then it would push a bulk of that principal back to when we otherwise had a sort of a debt service drop off, if you will, or a reduction in our payment in fiscal year 25. And then in column 5, you can see what with the post restructuring, the local effort, what that would be. And so one of the goals in restructuring this was to try to eliminate the large steps or the large drop off that we would have in certain years, and really step down each year so that there would be relief offered in each year moving forward. Not knowing what the future will hold, it seems like it would be good to have some relief in the next few years. And probably the best thing to do is look at there are 2 graphs which will show this visually. So if we can go to the next slide, please. This is a graph I shared with the board back in January, I believe. And so the green portion of the bar is the net debt service to the district. The yellow is the reimbursement from the state, and the entire bar represents the entire payment that needs to be made. And you can see in 2019-20, it's a little bit lower. The reason it's a little bit lower in the current year is because we had refinanced that debt earlier in the year and there was some savings in the current year. And so it's right now scheduled to go up a little bit for the coming year. And then you can see it drops for 2 years, sort of a big step down for a year, another big step down, and then it's sort of level moving forward. If we can go to the next slide, this is what the effect of the restructuring would be. It would offer relief in 2021. Again, it would step down a little bit more in 21-22, step down a little more in 22-23. You can see it sort of has those smaller steps out to 24-25. What we did try to do in terms of restructuring was keep the term of the debt the same, so that the final maturity on this particular piece of debt would still be in 2024 to 2025. And again, you see there's sort of a bigger step there between 24-25 and 25-26. But what we were trying to do is not extend our current debt, that piece of debt longer, but just restructure it within its current period. So again, this is conceptual. It certainly, we could make changes if the board had other ideas, but from my standpoint, I think it offers immediate relief for the coming year. It offers ongoing relief for the next few years. And the cost to do this, sorry, back on the slide with the restructuring information, there would be an additional interest payments over the term of this debt that would be about $275,000. Again, that's in interest because you're taking a good portion of the principal and moving it out several years, and so obviously there's some accumulated interest. So again, it's not there's not savings with regard to the total debt service payments. It does offer relief up front, and I just want to be clear about that for everybody, that the difference between relief and savings. And again, the cost to do that is estimated right now to be about $275,000 over the term of the, over the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5-year term of the debt. So sort of related to that, I wanted to talk briefly about the capital reserve fund piece. We are recommending a reduction of the contribution to capital reserve of about $500,000. And it's, as I had said a little earlier, it's related to that debt service restructuring. You may recall that each year that the debt service fell off, you know, some of those bigger steps, we were trying to capture that into capital reserve to pay for our ongoing maintenance needs. What I've done is sort of looked at the capital reserve contribution and then looked at this proposed debt restructuring. And if we captured each of those years moving forward, we certainly would be able to continue to fund our debt service, or our capital capital expenditure program, our capital program. Now, at the same time, sort of the structure of the debt is set up to offer relief. So if we needed that relief in a future year, obviously we'd have to look at, okay, now we need to start shuffling our capital improvement projects. But at this point, the way the debt restructuring would be set up, we could reduce the capital reserve contribution by about $500,000, and that our plans for the future would remain intact. So as you can see, those two are offering nearly $1.5 million of relief in the coming year, with no really long-term effect on our capital improvement program. And then the final piece, the fund balance, as we've talked about several times, fund balance is sometimes referred to as the rainy day fund. It's one-time funds. It's sort of like your savings account. You have to be careful about spending it on recurring costs because you have it in the drawer, if you will, and as you take it out, it doesn't get replenished. So looking at where our fund balance is presently and what would be a reasonable amount in order to be able to sort of back ourselves out of using that over future years, we feel at this point that about $500,000 is a very reasonable amount to use for next year's budget.
Do you want to take questions now, Mr. Saul, or are you continuing?
I think if you're okay, we'll continue.
Okay.
And so based on those proposed reductions that we're recommending as part of phase 1, a summary here, you can see that we started out with an original budget deficit of about $6 million. We were able to, in our first phase, reduce expenditures that totaled about $3.9 million, which leaves us a remaining deficit of just a little over $2 million. Again, I'll just emphasize that is with a 1.5% tax increase. And so recognizing that many members of the board, as well as the community, might be thinking again in terms of next phases, we recognize that based on feedback from the board this evening, we have more work to do as an administrative team in terms of closing that deficit of about over $2 million at this point. And so we have some next steps, or in phase 2 of those reductions, we recognize now that we potentially have to look at more areas to reduce our expenditures. And so we anticipate that as part of that next phase, we would continue to analyze staffing reductions. In particular, there might be courses with low enrollment. I will say that I know that the board recognizes that watching our course enrollment at the secondary level is something that we've always done. We've had very transparent conversations with the board in the past in terms of recognizing that there might be some courses that are the enrollment is so low that we don't offer those every year. So that's been a regular practice that we're used to. I will also point out to the board that you can appreciate recognizing the complexities of, in particular, a high school schedule. Simply having 1 or 2 sections of a course in a particular content area with a low enrollment doesn't necessarily enable us to completely reduce a teacher. So there are many facets, many complexities there that we have to continue to look at, but certainly we will continue to do that. We will also continue to look at reducing staffing through attrition at the elementary level. Again, the implications there will certainly be on class sizes at the elementary level. We will also look at programs such as the Learning to Succeed program at Emmaus High School, which is a credit recovery program for eligible juniors and seniors at Emmaus High School. We also recognize that a potential area to recoup some savings would be from our technology refresh cycle. Again, the implication there, we recognize that if we don't replace technology in a given year, that really just delays the life of the technology and sometimes puts us in more difficult or perilous financial situations years down the road. We also continue to analyze transportation to determine if there are any possible cost savings measures, particularly by looking at things such as length of runs, numbers of students who are assigned to runs, numbers of students who are actually riding buses. So we continue to analyze transportation as well. And then the final piece that we've identified as part of phase 2 would be looking at co and extracurricular clubs and activities, which are certainly will have an impact then on the programs that we're now offering our students district-wide. So those are our goal this evening, was to share with the board potential areas of phase 1 reductions, and also to give you a sense that, of course, we continue to analyze every aspect of our district budget and recognize that we have a ways to go yet. And certainly our goal would be to come back based on your feedback that we received tonight with some updated budget projections, and to give you a sense of where the deficit is then on the 26th. So at this point, certainly if you have any questions or comments, we welcome your feedback.
Please use the raise hand. Board members. I do not see any hands raised. I would comment, I appreciate the work on the debt restructuring, especially. I think that's a very prudent move to provide some budget relief this year and in the ongoing 2 or 3 years. We do not know how long these tough times are going to last, and I think that's a prudent move to provide some ease on the budget then and move those costs into the later years when the debt service was declining faster. So,
Dr. Bacher, there are a number of us have our hands raised.
oh, I don't see it on my. I don't see the hand raised on my panelist list. I suppose just one by one.
Ms. Bowman, I see your hand.
Yeah.
Yes. First, I just want to make a quick comment that just want to thank you for, I mean, these are terrible times that force us to make decisions that no matter what we do, we won't be happy with. But I think you found a way to make what I'll call the most painless cuts that could possibly be made. Obviously, there's no such thing as a painless one, but there's ones that would hurt a lot more. And I am happy that you did your best to avoid those. I do have just a quick question. We had talked last meeting about that raising that tax relief program. I'm assuming that got I don't know, is that still a thing or did it get delayed?
Yeah, I will say that's still a thing. I guess we will bring that back to the board more than likely at the next meeting. I think we really, as administration, we're trying to look at that holistically with everything else, and try to return something that is balanced. We certainly heard the comments of the board at the last meeting, and we'll certainly use those as guidance. But you'll likely see that at the next meeting.
Okay. I was just wondering if that was still baked in, so it's still a part of the budget within the still adding to the 2 million that you're trying to find a way to solve. And my only other question was about fund balance. And what is it that you look at to decide what's a healthy use of the fund balance? I remember distinctly last time saying if there was a time to use it, now is the time. And why would we not use more of it at this moment?
The challenge is if unlike last year when we had anticipated using nearly $1 million of fund balance, but it was all associated with well-defined one-time expenses, projects that we knew would happen and then not recur. Whereas any fund balance we use now, we are dedicating to the budget, and we know that it's really pegged to recurring expenses. So if we, for instance, use $1 million this year, and that's recurring expenses, which could experience inflational increases, next year those expenses might be $1.1 million, just to use a rough number. And so now we have to figure out how to no longer use that $1 million from budget fund balance, and that expense has grown. So you have to be very careful about that concept.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Next, Mr. Champagne.
Yes, Bob and Christian, I want to thank you for your efforts. Bob, on the restructuring side of the debt, you said it was just a portion of the 2012 series, not the full amount. Is there any benefit or additional benefit that we could achieve by even levelizing the whole series out through the end of its term versus just the portion that you looked at in this round? So that in fact, where it really takes that steep drop off, we still have, obviously it's nice to see that, but if we were to levelize the entire series all the way out to its maturity, would that provide additional savings up front? I know it come at a cost because we're going to paying additional interest, but is that a way to, help close the gap a little bit greater in these first couple of years versus just taking a portion of it?
Yeah, certainly you could. I think you could levelize it. I don't know that you could levelize all of it because, again, the series of 2012 is what's callable, and currently the series of 2012 just goes out to fiscal year ending 25. So I don't know if there will be enough to backfill. I don't know if the outstanding debt is enough to backfill and completely levelize that. You are correct. You certainly could extend that piece of debt beyond 25, because if you're restructuring or a refinancing type of refinancing, I guess, you certainly could go longer. We, as you said, there's certainly additional cost to that. And so we want to try to minimize our costs, if you will, while coming up with a plan that we felt was very beneficial over the next few years. I think the truth of the matter is, we are facing a dire situation now, which we're trying to resolve. I believe we don't know what may happen beyond 5 years. And I don't know that we can forget some of the conversations we've had around our capital needs, and our, those future needs. We've talked about doing a facility study, all things that are very difficult to talk about and remember now, but where that debt falls off may very well marry up very nicely with additional needs we have down the road. So that could offer a lot of relief that a future board may be interested in. And again, I say that knowing we are facing difficult times now, but I always hate to just kick the can down the road and create some sort of problem in the future. Not even sure if it'd be a problem, but I hope that makes sense in terms of the thought
No, I
process.
appreciate that, and I just wanted to kind of get your logic behind why you truncated it at the 2020, 24, 25 time horizon, and obviously that if that's the maturity of the debt, that makes sense. And I do recognize that we do have some potential capital, some significant potential capital requirements in the future, be it for internal, just needs that we have with the existing building stock, or if we are going to do something beyond that, with the demographic study and so forth. So I didn't know if the people that you've been consulting with had any other thoughts in terms of how we could maybe get a little more relief in the first several years, because we're still facing over $2 million of shortfall, and if we really want to go any lower on the tax rate, we're going to see a bigger shortfall that we need to fill, and that's why I'm just wondering if there's some more, even if you took it out one additional year of of maturity, or maybe you might see another several $100,000 of relief that could be beneficial in this year. So I don't know if that's worth having a conversation with the people you consult with. The other question I had is, have we, I recognize in some of the discussions around personnel, we've, it's all been with respect to attrition. And I'm just wondering, have we factored in, we have more people retiring based on what I saw in the personnel section of the board agenda. Have we factored in all those cost savings as well, in terms of the difference in salary that those individuals, between those who are retiring and potentially if we're backfilling those positions, or are we thinking some of those positions might be where we get additional cost savings by not replacing them in totality?
Yeah, we actually have not factored those in at this point. My intention is for that to be reflected when we bring actual documents, budget documents to the board on the 26th. But you're correct. There is certainly what we sometimes refer to as breakage, that difference between the retiree and the new person. Just on the flip side, we have to consider when somebody retires under the early retirement incentive program, there's some cost related to benefits. So we have to also factor that in. But yes, that I intend to bring back. The other thing I will say is the numbers you see here are not necessarily etched in stone. We certainly, they could go up or down by a few $1,000s. We sort of rounded them off to the nearest, the nearest whole number, if you will, not necessarily meaning the nearest 1 or 10, but it could be the nearest 1,000. So,
and then
sorry.
my last question, and I'll turn it over to back to Ken. How painful would it be if we were to go to reduce building department budgets by 20%?
I will share my thought, and then even Mrs. Campbell may want to share as well. I think 20% is difficult. I think in years gone by, building budgets were reduced and were never restored. So I think we are certainly, I think, putting pressure on the buildings when we get down to the 10%. I guess anything's possible. But it certainly, I think, would have an effect in terms of some of the things the buildings are able to do. And again, I certainly pass it back to Mrs. Campbell to comment.
Yeah, I think your reflection on the fact that over in previous budget cycles, we have continued to sort of to reduce those building and department budgets already. And so certainly I have serious concerns about our buildings being able to provide students with the educational program resources, materials that they need. And again, those are speaking to building budgets. Certainly when we look at our department budgets, I have similar concerns as well, simply because we recognize that in previous years, while it may not have been 10%, in previous years, we have continued to try to reduce our budgets.
Okay, well, I guess my only concern is that, you know, again, is it better to go down that path versus reducing staffing at some point? Where's the, you know, I know it's a trade-off that you don't want to do either necessarily, but would reducing those, you know, non-staff budgets be preferable to reducing staffing? So just throw that out there. Thank you.
And Mr. Jankowski?
Thanks. And thank you, Mrs. Campbell and Mr. Saul. I commend you for the work you put into doing this uneasy task of finding ways to save money. I have a couple questions first on the debt restructuring. Kind of along the lines of what Mr. Champagne was asking with respect to building it out longer. You know, I appreciate the savings that we're going to realize in the first couple of years. My one concern is in 2025, and you know, to the extent that we may have an increase of $3 million in expense based on the restructuring. Do we envision? You know, this is going a little bit beyond the long-term planning at this stage, but you know, the concern is that going to create an issue for us in 2025, and is there a way to spread that out further, you know, spread that amount over a couple additional years so that there's not one big hit at the end?
With regard to that, I guess, while it's an increase in 2025, overall it's a decrease in terms of our total debt service. So there's relief from the prior year. In terms of putting that into the long range plan and looking out into the future, it doesn't have a significant impact because we don't really have, for instance, a huge capital project that we're planning for and need that relief in a specific year. As I had mentioned, each year that this debt would decline, we certainly need to try to shift what we were paying, that drop off, if you will, that reduction over to contribution to capital reserve in order to continue to fund the projects that we've mapped out for the next several years. So in terms of there being one sort of a large additional payment that year, again, it's a decline. And then I don't know that, you know, sort of having one more year in the 5 million before it drops down would necessarily be detrimental at this point.
And what's included in the cost in the 275,000 addition? I mean, is that everything? Is that the all-in additional expense to doing the restructuring, and what comprises that amount?
Yeah, so the 275,000 is the all-in, but really that's related to interest, because you're taking principal that ordinarily you would be paying up more of that up front, and you're pushing it back. I mean, you're pushing nearly $3 million of principal payments to the last year of the bond. So you're really incurring additional interest expense.
And what kind of fees are associated with doing the restructuring?
Typically, you have your financial advisor fees, bond counsel fees, fees for your solicitor. There will, if it's a traditional bond issuance, you'll have your underwriter's fees, advertising, I believe there's a fee to file with the Department of Community and Economic Development. Might have missed one or two small ones, but I think for the most part, that's what you.
And that's all in this 275 already?
Correct.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Sure.
And then with respect to the staff reductions, has there any thought, well, I'm sure there has been thought, but, the concern there is obviously the bigger the class sizes get, particularly at the elementary level, the impact on the students and the ability to reach these students. I mean, 25 students a class, in my opinion, are too many, even, 20. Do we have any indication or any thought about 30 and if we could, even if we could increase or decrease building expenditures by another 5% somehow to offset the reduction in teachers, that would have a direct impact on class size, because that is a concern.
I appreciate that, and as you know, as I explained as we were going through the reductions, we certainly recognize that all of the cost savings measures that we're proposing this evening, while this is our initial attempt at reducing expenditures, they all have an impact in some way, shape, or form. I recognize at the elementary level, the changes of reducing teachers certainly is going to have an impact on those class sizes. I will say we are mindful about the grade levels in which those larger class sizes might be. They typically would be in intermediate grades, 4th or 5th grades. I'll say as well, those are classes where we have in the past worked through large class sizes of 29 or 30. And I say that as a former elementary teacher, and I will never try to minimize the impact, but I think it really speaks to, I'm going to say, sort of the dire situation that we are all in right now as a team, in having to identify ways in which we could close a $6 million deficit.
Are there any opportunities, other contractual opportunities, on the supply side, to renegotiate contracts by either extending them for a couple years more at a lower cost, for materials or any of that there's, I mean, is there anything that presents itself with such an opportunity?
I would say any such thing we are certainly looking at and considering. As I discussed, I think I discussed at the last meeting, our budget is 70% salaries and wages, 30% other things. Of that 30%, a significant portion of that is debt service, transportation. There are some pretty big chunks, and so that piece that you're talking about quickly becomes about 15 or 20% of our budget. And so there's just not a whole lot there. I mean, you can reduce, but the fact is that many of those things you still need. So we're certainly trying to consider every possible area. We continue to talk about things daily, but I'm not sure, again, there's sort of the wand that takes away millions of dollars of problem in that area alone. So, and again, I'm not sure that you're suggesting that finding all of that in one area, but it's just, it's as Mrs. Campbell has said, it's the challenge that we face is a significant deficit, and trying to find the multiple areas where we can, try to make up for that next year.
Yeah, and I will share there are a few, maybe some service contracts that certainly we are in the process of investigating. I know that I mentioned transportation as one area, and there are a few others, and we certainly are hopeful that maybe we can bring some savings measures back to the board in the future. I think, to reiterate Mr. Saul's point, the dilemma also becomes that sometimes those savings are while it's savings and we know that they add up, they're really not helping us to have a substantial impact on closing that deficit. But again, to reiterate the point, we recognize that $60,000, $50,000, it all continues to add up. But we're really trying to identify some of those bigger items that can help us to reduce that deficit.
Well, and again, I thank you so much, you know, for the work you guys have put into this. I know it's not easy to do, and I think, you know, what you've presented so far is a great job. So thanks.
Thank you. Dr. Munson?
Yes, thank you. I too would like to thank you, Mrs. Campbell, and Mr. Saul for all of this work, and in particular for being realistic about the fact that these cuts actually have implications for our students and people in the East Penn community. I think that these cuts are going to be painful, but I also don't think it doesn't help us not to be transparent about what it is that we actually need to give up, because I think we can make better choices about that. I have a question for Mr. Saul based on the debt restructuring as well. I was just curious about what the state of the bond market is right now in terms of its volatility and predictability. Are we confident in in past bond restructurings, the numbers that have come back that we've actually received when we have put things out to bid have been very, very close to the numbers we have seen in going out to bid in the first place. Do you believe we're likely to see that now? I mean, that is, can we make those predictions as well now as we've been able to in the past?
Yeah, and so I actually asked that question myself. My experience, probably I've been involved in at least a dozen bond issuances over the past several years, and my experience is always that, for instance, with this one, they tell you 2%, but it comes in at 1.75, or it comes in at 1.5. You know, they sort of estimate on the high side, and so I said, you know, is this one of those where we'll see it come in sort of you know lower than this, and we'll actually be able to erase some of that $275,000 interest expense? And they said, unfortunately, that's pretty close to what they're seeing in the market, you know, benchmarked against the structure of this series versus other ones that they've been handling. What I will say is, you know, they always share, and you'll see it as we move forward, and you've seen it in the past, what the bond market looks like in terms of the ups and downs, and it is actually a little volatile at the moment. It was actually on its way down. You know, we know that the Fed rate is very close to zero, and so you might expect this to be much more favorable, but unfortunately, the municipal bond rate market has not necessarily followed in suit. So they tell me that 2% is probably a very good budget number to use, and that it will likely come in very close to that.
Okay, great. Thank you. I guess my other two things aren't questions, but more requests. I mean, one, for me, it would be very useful in talking about the building and department budget reductions, whether it's 10%, which is what you're currently proposing, or more, as Mr. Champagne had asked about. I think it would be useful to have some concrete ideas, that is concrete examples of what it is we have now that we can't have next year because of these reductions. And it doesn't have to be an exhaustive list, but because I think it's hard to conceptualize what this reduction looks like without it being a little bit more concrete for people who aren't in the daily business of managing a building budget for a public school. So that'd be my first request. And then I guess my second request is, it would be useful as this budget discussion continues to see a phase 3 or an alternate sort of set of cuts that recognizes that we may not be able to maintain that 1.5% tax increase in the coming year. I'm reminded of this as I look at the news that we now have the worst unemployment rate in this country since the Great Depression. And so in the interests of balance, and going back to the issue of that I had mentioned earlier about sort of being clear about what we'd have to give up and what the community through its schools would have to sacrifice in order to come in at a zero tax increase budget, I think it'd be useful to know in some concrete terms what that would look like for our schools. And with that, I yield back to.
Dr. Levinson?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Bacher. A lot of what I was going to ask about or comment on has been covered from my colleagues. So I'm very grateful to all the thought that comes along with that. I am appreciative of this presentation. It is showing some strong thought in terms of looking at what it is we can do to try and close this gap. And I do, I'm very grateful for all the effort for that. But I'd like to I guess, second some of the points that were made by my colleagues. I think Dr. Munson's suggestion of what would things look like if we need to move or move that 1.5% tax rate assumption right now to something lower, because again, there is a strong concern that that's something that needs to be considered. I do appreciate Ms. Bowman asking about the incorporation of the senior citizen property tax rebate program, because again, I do strongly feel that that is something that we need to consider. And as Mr. Saul says, holistically, in conjunction with everything else we're doing in the budget. But I did have a couple follow-on points back to the debt restructuring. I think some of this was covered in a prior question with about volatility. But what's the time frame to execute a debt restructuring plan, and how quickly can that come about for us to really try and help lock in what we think is the best deal?
Yeah, so these bonds actually mature in September. So we would want to actually get started fairly soon. What I would like, I gave you a very high level overview of what a conceptual bond restructuring to sort of get feedback. And I think, I've been gaining feedback, and I appreciate that. But I will want to get our financial advisors to come before the board to talk about it in a little more depth and allow the board to ask some more questions in depth. In terms of the speed, typically it's relatively quickly that we can, once the board passes the resolution, so the board will need to pass a resolution in order to do this. Once the resolution is enacted, then we can move relatively quickly. Typically, what they will do is sort of try to watch the market for a prime time to make to have the transaction, and then execute the transaction, because really the resolution the board would pass would give the authority to execute that, and then be reviewed by the administration and signed off on by the board president. So.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Saul. And one other question I had, and maybe it's not fair to ask for specifics on it, but the phase 2 items that you listed out do seem to be like the natural areas to look next. Do you have any sense for the magnitude of savings that could be had with that, and would it be sufficient to close that final $2.5 million gap, or are we going to have to look further?
I don't have exact amounts in terms of the approximate cost of those items. And I say that because, for example, when we look at some things such as a Learning to Succeed program, really the conversation is around potentially reimagining it and maybe offering it in equally effective yet cost efficient manner as opposed to not offering it at all. So, you know, the amount of savings could vary based on the model that we might go with. But and Mr. Saul, feel free to jump in here. Even with phase 2, I am very confident that we are going to have to move on to a phase 3. I don't anticipate that phase 2 will recoup the remaining $2 million.
Okay, thank you. That's important for everybody to recognize at this point. And then I guess my last point is more of a comment. You know, I do think that the suggestion of using only $500,000 out of fund balance, I think, is of the right magnitude, because again, you know, our district is going to you know, exist for many years, and so, you know, we do have to keep that in mind, and I think it's better to look at what we can do operationally than you know, what we have in the bank at this point. So thank you again for all your efforts, and I look forward to hearing more about this in 2 weeks. Thank you.
Thank you. My raise hand view is not, I see Mr. Byrd wants to speak. Mr. Byrd?
Just have one question, one follow-up question, Mr. Saul. The effect of the debt, how effect would that have on our future? Any bonds that we want, a debt we want to try to incur? Any negative effect or positive? The restructuring of the bonds, restructurings.
Yeah, so I think the biggest effect that the restructuring has, which again is, well, the biggest effect it has is when you want to issue bonds in the future, you have to have the ability to pay those. So you have to have the capacity, if you will, to be able to pay the debt service payment each year for that debt. There's a few ways you can do that. You can build up over time through tax increases that exceed your operational costs in order to pay debt, or as I showed the graph earlier, when debt service steps down, you can marry that up with new debt, if that makes sense. And so in terms of, is there a direct negative consequence in terms of you know, a view of the district by a potential bondholder? I don't think so. It's just really, if you were to have level debt for several years, you don't really have that capacity in the future. So that goes back to the question earlier about, you know, why did we only look at the existing footprint or the existing maturity date and not extend beyond that? And that's really the reason, is so that in 5 years, there's really the ability of the district to do some other things it may need to do, rather than sort of needing to then have some other type of plan to be able to do those things. Does that make sense? Was that clear?
Yes, that was my second question. You just answered it. By leveling out, you keep, make sure you see have capacity to pay debt later on. So that was my second question. You asked my second question. Thank you.
Thank you.
2 for 1. Ms. Winch?
Hi, I just wanted to say something really for the public. I want to thank you, Dr. Monson, for acknowledging that there could very well not be a 1.5% increase in taxes because of legislation that is possibly coming up in the state legislature. So for some folks, attendees that weren't in the last meeting, they might not realize that. And I believe that 1.5% increase in taxes, I believe it equated to $1.5 million. So I know I've personally been thinking about this debt. I like to think the worst and expect the worst. So I've been thinking about this deficit, not debt, as 7.5 million personally. So I appreciate if we can build that in, or at least have it as an option, so that we know, so we are prepared for the very worst. And I also wanted to thank you for all of your work. I don't know how you do it, Mr. Saul, You do an incredible job explaining this to us. So thank you so much. And I love that you're always finding ideas. And I thank you very much for keeping the rebate program, the expansion of the rebate program built into this budget, because I think that's very important. So thank you.
Thank you. And if I can just comment, I guess fortunately or unfortunately, I get to be sort of the face of the finances, if you will. But I do need to recognize that there are a whole lot of people who are doing a lot of things that you can't see, and so that it takes a village. In this case, it takes an entire team in the district, and so I would be remiss if I took any credit and didn't recognize the team that's doing a lot of the work. So thank you so much.
Well, you hired well and you taught well, so thank you.
Mr. Champagne?
Yeah, Bob, just one quick follow-up on the debt restructuring. And looking at the revised schedule, do you think it would be possible to think about reducing the debt service in, with the restructuring? You have about $8.1 million of debt service for the fiscal year ending 2021. If you were to reduce that by $1 million and then spread that $1 million over the last 4 years, so that's roughly $250,000 of principal added to the last 4 years. It's such a steep drop off between 2025 and then 26, 27, 28, and 29 that I'm just wondering if we spread, if we took $1 million out of the first year where we could grab $1 million of savings and spread that principal over the last 4 years, we're not really, I don't see the impact being that great in terms of the capacity that we're losing in terms of the debt service. But that's $1 million that, that's a big chunk that we could possibly get in year one versus trying to, really, go through some of the programs and other things that we may have to. Anyway, just a thought. We looked at the schedule and I didn't know if that was something you had thought about or if your advisors had ruled it out. So anyway, just a thought.
Thank you. And if I could just quick comment, I guess the thought process was if we were trying to build in reduction in the future years. So if we dropped $1 million in the front year, which we certainly could do, I mean, there's a lot of possibilities here, and I'm not sure that there are necessarily any right or wrong answers. They're just different variations. But it's very close to next year's debt service payment, and there's really no relief. And I was looking at, I guess my thought is I'd want to try to structure something that stepped down because we don't know what next year is going to look like. And so I think having some relief would be helpful. So that was the thought process, at least, was trying to ensure that there was a step down each year. In order to achieve that, obviously, if we dropped $1 million this year, we'd have to drop some amount the following year. So again, not whether it's right or wrong, but that was the thought process, is so that we're helping insulate a little bit against what next year and the future years may look like.
No, I appreciate that. And I guess what I'm just trying to think of is, okay, if we're trying to get to anywhere between 2 million and 3.5 million, it's not going to be easy. And so there's going to have to be some trade-offs and painful choices that are going to be made. And obviously, this is one area that we have some control over. We can manipulate the restructuring schedule. And I'm just looking at it and saying, those back years where we're down to $1.45 million of effort, that's a significant amount of headroom that we have. And I know we want to try to preserve some of that or most of that. So I'm just wondering if we can do a little bit more in the front end, add a little bit, extend the maturity and add a little in the back end. I don't know that it's going to, yes, there's going to be a cost, there's going to be additional interest payments. But, you're talking about, in the current case, 275,000 spread over 5 years. So you're talking, a little over, roughly $60,000 of additional interest per year. So I'm just wondering if there's a little bit more we could do in the front end to get us some of the anywhere from 2 to 3.5 million that we're looking at. Just some thoughts.
Yeah. And again, I appreciate that. I'm having, just to draw a parallel, having lived through since 2001, dealing with PESers and knowing sort of how that, and I hate to use that as a reference for us in this particular scenario, but they sort of just kept kicking the can and pushing it back to the future. And I know it's a little bit different, but I'm a little gun shy about taxing may not be the word, putting additional pressures on the future when we don't know what the future will look like, especially when the horizon now is beyond the original footprint. But I will go back. I'll certainly have the our financial advisors look at a scenario like that, and let's see what it looks like. I think it's worth having a look.
Thank you.
And I'll ask my participants' view is not working correctly. So for the rest of the meeting, if board members can just physically raise their hand to indicate they want the floor, that will be helpful moving forward. Are there any other questions or comments? Well, thank you very much, Mr. Saul, for your presentation and answers. Moving on to district update, Mrs. Campbell.
Some exciting things happening, even though our buildings are closed. Some of those exciting things are East Penn is hosting an online book fair in partnership with Let's Play Books and Emmaus. And that book fair runs May 11th through the 22nd. And I'm excited to share that a portion of the proceeds from that online book fair will benefit our school libraries. So please take advantage of that. It gives me great pleasure to congratulate Melissa Montero, who is a social studies teacher at Emmaus High School, and she was recently recognized as the Alpha Delta Kappa Pennsylvania Excellence in Education winner. And she will continue as a finalist for the Northeastern region. May is Mental Health Month. And again, to reiterate our message that while our buildings are closed, we are all still here virtually to help our community. So if we have any students who find themselves struggling with anxiety or depression during what can be a really difficult time when our buildings are closed, we encourage our students to reach out to their guidance counselor or school psychologist for help. We can also help support our local businesses while showing our Emmaus pride. The Emmaus Main Street program and the Greater Lehigh Valley Chambers are sponsoring a t-shirt sale. Those t-shirts read Emmaus Proud, #SupportLocal. And a portion of the proceeds from the t-shirt sale will be donated to the East Penn Angel Networks, which are organizations that support families in all 10 of our East Penn buildings. So if you're interested in your Emmaus Proud t-shirt, you can order a t-shirt through the Emmaus Main Street Partners. They have a Facebook page. The information's available there. And we also have the information posted on our East Penn social media. A few reminders for our students. May 23rd will be the last day to order a graduate sign to recognize a class of 2020 grad. So families and friends, if you have a student who is graduating this spring, please honor them with a class of 2020 grad sign. You can find the details for those on our social media as well. To our student athletes, if you're considering signing up for a fall sport, our fall sports signups this year will be done online. And so please watch for information from your school regarding fall sports signups. Speaking of athletes, our athletic administration under the direction of Becky George just recently released a virtual press conference that featured our 2020 senior athletes who shared their post-graduation plans. If you've not yet seen it, it's an awesome tribute to our student athletes. And I encourage you to check out that virtual press conference. It's available on our social media as well as on the high school website. And finally, our high school administrative team has a committee that has been working for many weeks on coming up with contingency plans for high school graduation. And so I know that there are many, many students and community members who are patiently waiting for information regarding graduation. So please, please watch carefully, because our high school admin team by the end of this week does plan to finalize and communicate their decision regarding graduation. And there will be communication via our newsletter, email, as well as social media regarding the graduation arrangements for this spring. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Campbell. Are there any questions or comments from the board? Then moving on to personnel, may I have a motion for items 1 through 4?
Joshua Levinson, so moved.
Second, Elisa
Alan
Bowman.
Byrd, second.
Is there any discussion? Mrs. Allen, will you call the roll, please?
Mr. Champagne,
Aye.
Mr. Jankowski,
Aye.
Dr. Levinson,
Aye.
Dr. Munson,
Yes.
Mr. Smith,
Aye.
Ms. Winch,
Aye.
Ms. Bowman,
Yes.
Mr. Byrd,
Aye.
Dr. Bacher.
Aye.
9 ayes.
Motion passes. Moving on to business operations. If there are no objections, can I have a motion for all the items except item D, the change order?
Jeff
Paul
Jankowski,
Champagne,
so
so
moved.
moved.
Could someone,
I heard Paul Champagne as the first one.
can I have a second?
Seconding.
Okay. Are there any questions or discussion? Mrs. Allen, will you call the roll, please?
Mr. Jankowski,
Aye.
Dr. Levinson,
Aye.
Dr. Munson,
Aye.
Mr. Smith,
Aye.
Ms. Winch,
Aye.
Ms. Baumann,
Yes.
Mr. Byrd,
Aye.
Mr. Champagne,
Aye.
Dr. Bacher.
Aye.
9 ayes.
Motion's pass. May I have a motion now for the change order proposal, item D?
Adam Smith, so moved.
Elisa Bowman.
Is there a second? Or was that the second?
That was Elisa Bowman.
Okay. Is there any discussion, questions? Mr. Jankowski?
Just one comment, and this was a concern of mine that I had raised when we had approved the contract a couple months ago. In the change order, under the clarifications and exclusions, the first sentence states that the total cost only includes the scope of work as listed, and any additional work not listed but needed to complete the change will be a separate proposal. And a concern of mine, anytime you have construction projects, is the contractor trying to generate more revenues by issuing multiple change orders. And this is one of those examples that concerns me, where they're leaving open the door for additional work that may be needed to complete this change. And I question why aren't they opening? Why weren't they able to include the depth of the work expected to be included? I don't want them coming back to us every month or every couple of weeks with another nickel and diming us with continuing change orders where this project cost exceeds what the other bids were that we rejected. I'd like to see, and in my experience, they're able to do so. This is they do this kind of work. So they should be able to, you know, I'd prefer to see a change order that is more inclusive rather than something that's limited like this and leaves open the door for, you know, additional change orders. Because I really don't want to be looking to approve change orders at every board meeting.
Mr. Jankowski, I have added Jamie Lynch, who is from Dewey Engineering. As you know, he has been with us before. He's a lead on this project. And so, Jamie, I see you're there. If you have any response to the concerns raised.
I did unmute. Just want to make sure that you can hear me. Give me a thumbs up, folks. Okay. Mr. Jankowski, thanks very much for the question. It's good to be with you this evening. First, I just want to clarify very clearly that the change for the added field that has been proposed has been completely priced by Skepton Construction on a lump sum basis for all of the work that you see. Skepton was involved with us in working with Lehigh County Conservation District, who has seen the plans for the additional field. And so they have seen all of the details, and their change order price is for all of the work that's shown on the drawings that have been generated for the field. It is a detailed proposal and grading plan that's been put forth. And so I don't anticipate that there's additional costs as we go for this field. If you would prefer for me to change that language to suit you and to lock it down any further, I'd be happy to do so, but it's not a time and expense proposal. It is a lump sum proposal for all the work to construct the field, grade the field, seed the field, maintain erosion and sediment controls, and also allow the district to hold retainage until sufficient grass growth, such that we can close out the NPDS permit with Lehigh County Conservation District. I hope that gives you a little bit more confidence in what the proposal contains.
No, absolutely. I do appreciate that. You know, in light of the lump sum contract, you know, I would prefer that type of language is no longer inserted in change orders, or well, I prefer we don't see any more change orders, but if we do, I would prefer that it does not include, particularly to your point, it's a lump sum contract, so there should be no need for T&M type charging. So, I mean, I don't know, is that an easy, I don't want to delay the project, but is that something that can be stricken and initialed or and approved with that today?
Yes, absolutely. I can, you know, strengthen that language for you as well and work with the solicitor just to make sure that we all believe that it is a comprehensive price and that there is not wiggle room for something else. Of course, on the project elsewhere on the project, not on the additional field, if something comes up that isn't unforeseen, unfortunately, it's a natural part of construction. But we've worked very hard with Skepton, with the detailers who put the plan together, and like I said, the Conservation District, that we feel the price is comprehensive.
Nope, understood. Thanks.
Mr. Fisher, did you have a comment on that?
Yeah, just briefly, and kind of following up with what Mr. Lynch said, and Mr. Jankowski referred to language which appears in the change order proposal. That's language that comes from the contractor proposing the change. Some of that's been cleaned up already because you don't see that type of language that appears in the actual change order that's actually written up by Mr. Lynch. But we'll double check. We will make sure that it's clear that it's a lump sum, and that is the lump sum, no more.
Thanks.
Dr. Levinson?
All right, thank you. I have a few questions and points. You know, having been involved in a lot of project work, when things come up, you always ask yourself, is this something that we could have foreseen in somehow, in some fashion? So I know that you know, we contracted doing engineering, and I know that we did some initial site survey work and whatnot. Did any of that work incorporate any initial test pits or test tests of the soil itself to perhaps had some idea as to where things would head in terms of the quality of the soil?
Dr. Levinson, the initial geotechnical report did not do a clean fill analysis on the soil. We had no reason to believe that there was a spill or something on the soil. However, the state requirements changed as of January 1st. And for 3 of the compounds that are in the report, our numbers dramatically decreased. And that is what has caused the challenge as
Right.
far as what to do with the soils.
Right. I did take note of the change. So I guess my second question is was the change in the limits? How long was that known that the state was going to change that? I know they must announce things ahead of time on that.
Well, I was unsure when that change was going to actually occur, whether it was going to be January 1st or sometime thereafter. So when it came on January 1st, it was, I don't want to say a bit of a surprise. We knew something was coming. We just didn't know when, and we didn't know how severe the changes would be.
Okay. And then I guess the last question is, I seem to recall, and I may be mistaken, that there was some discussion when we were talking about budgetary estimates that the quality of the soil may actually work in our benefit to create a credit towards the budget. I went back with the last couple of reports, and I didn't see that. So I don't know if that's still a valid point, and I just want to make sure that the swing in the expenses here is solely constrained to the value of this change order and not some other buried savings that came from the contractor being able to utilize the soil.
No, if I understand your question correctly, the price that was bid is a reflection of the general contractor's ability to originally, assuming clean fill, dispose of that fill on a site that he owned within 3 miles of the school site.
Okay.
So it was realized on bid day, that savings. Unfortunately, due to the nature of the constituents, he can no longer accept it on his site. And so the alternative is to try to find the location on the site in which to dispose of the soil, which is what we've done. So there's not some other component to that proposal, Dr. Levinson, that reflects some type of credit for the quality of the soil.
Okay. So obviously, I know that there's always some randomness to whatever hole in the ground you decide to dig. So maybe, we weren't as lucky on this one. But redistributing all this soil on our property, again, the limits don't look that high, but just a very general question. Do we have any environmental concern about spreading the soil now that it's going to be disturbed and respread on our property?
That's a great question. And the most succinct way that I can answer it is that we live in a region of Pennsylvania, southeastern Pennsylvania, that it's known for its limestone deposits, its carbonate geology. And along with the limestone, the carbonate geology, is the fact that metals are naturally occurring in the soils in southeastern Pennsylvania. The components that you've seen are naturally occurring in limestone. We can, refer to maps that are identified by the USGS that show this swath of southeastern Pennsylvania that runs really from the bottom of Lehigh County down through Chester County, is all underlain with materials and rock formations that is known to be naturally containing many of the metals that you've seen. In fact, we've fared pretty well. And just to speak one moment to the changes that were in the clean fill policy, even if we had tested the soil under the old regulations and seen high concentrations of one of those metals, because of the naturally occurring metals in the soils in southeastern Pennsylvania, in all likelihood, we would have received a clean fill certificate. under the old regulations pre-January 1st.
Right.
Here you'll see, and I know that I forwarded on more detail where vanadium is a compound that has really hammered us, where other portions of the state don't have a problem with that. Here in Southeast Pennsylvania, vanadium is an issue. To go one further point with respect to contamination, I don't want anyone to misunderstand. This is not hazardous material.
Okay.
It qualifies as regulated soil under the state's Clean Fill Act, and it's tightly regulated such that there's only limited numbers of places I can dispose of it. But if I wanted to go through, or if we wanted to go through a protracted permitting process with the Pennsylvania DEP, they would probably identify that this was naturally occurring and allow that soil to move. Now, I don't want to take that gamble with the new policy that's in effect as of January 1st, but it would be certainly something, regardless, that would delay the project here that's underway this spring.
Sure.
And unfortunately, with the COVID issue, the way there's so many bad news stories, with the students not on site, this gives us the opportunity to create what I believe will be a wonderful new practice field on the high school site.
Okay. I can agree with you. It was a smart use to repurpose the soil. The other comment I was going to make is I noticed that, like the chromium and I think even in manganese, is constituents to stainless steel. So I was thinking maybe we should change the composition of our football spikes to plastic so that we don't recontaminate the soil. Anyway, just a funny aside there. But thank you, Mr. Lynch, for your comments.
Thank you.
Mr. Smith?
Thank you for joining us tonight, Mr. Lynch. Appreciate it. Quick logistical question. We're talking about redistributing the soil to the softball field and then seeding the entire area to make a larger practice field. What exactly is the plan for softball as a sport going forward if we're seeding their infield?
The softball field, and I know there's others on the line who will know better, the softball field is not presently used for softball competition, and it was to be converted to the throwing events venue. So now it would be a combined large practice field that does have the throwing events on it, and the infield mix is actually being repurposed to go to existing softball fields.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Champagne?
Yes, Mr. Lynch, thank you again for joining us. In your professional opinion, when you look at the change order price, how do you feel? Is this something that's reasonable, or are we being, in a tough spot, somewhat taken advantage of? What is your view on that?
I don't think you're being taken advantage of at all, really. There's been no charge for any additional hauling or anything that is anything other than placing the soil, grading the soil, seeding the soil. I've done natural turf fields in manners like this where the numbers have been $40,000 to $50,000 and up for a new single soccer field, and this field is probably 1.5 times the size of a soccer field. So I think that Skepton Construction has provided every opportunity and every advantage in order to give the district the best possible price that they can.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Mrs. Allen, will you call the roll, please?
Dr. Levinson,
Aye.
Dr. Munson,
Aye.
Mr. Smith,
Aye.
Ms. Winch,
Aye.
Ms. Baumann,
Yes.
Mr. Byrd,
Aye.
Mr. Champagne,
Aye.
Mr. Jankowski,
Aye.
Dr. Bacher.
Aye.
9 ayes.
Motion passes. Moving on to curriculum, may I have a motion for the list of Emmaus High School 2020 graduates?
Joshua Levinson, so moved.
Ziad Munson, second.
Is there any discussion? Mrs. Allen, will you call the roll, please?
Dr. Munson,
Aye.
Mr. Smith,
Aye.
Ms. Winch, Ms. Winch,
Aye.
Ms. Bowman,
Yes.
Mr. Byrd,
Aye.
Mr. Champagne,
Aye.
Mr. Jankowski,
Aye.
Dr. Levinson,
Aye.
Dr. Bacher.
Aye.
9 ayes.
Motion passes. Moving on to policy. We have a second reading of our policies that we went through at last meeting, other than policy 006.1. Mr. Provolitis, do you have any comments, introducing comments?
Sure. So for policy 204 and 233, there are no updates to those policies. Regarding policy 006.1, based on feedback provided during the April 27th meeting, Mr. Fisher and I did meet and discuss the feedback, and a line was added at the bottom of page 1 under the guidelines section to provide some information on participants attending the meeting, necessary participants, I should clarify. So they're the updates.
So if I'll first ask, are there any comments on policies other than 006.1? Does not look like there are, so that'll conclude the second reading, and those will be on the agenda for approval in the next meeting. Then for policy 006.1, may I have a motion to approve this policy?
Paul Champagne, so moved.
Second.
I have a point of order, Dr. Bacher.
Yes.
Can you remind us what the provisions are for adopting something only on the second reading? Is the fact that we do 3 readings just our past practice, or do we have to suspend the rules to pass a policy with just on the second reading?
Our policy is to have 2 readings, and normally we wait an extra meeting to vote on it after the second reading, which is what we're doing on the policies in Part A. This time, because of the nature of the changes and the uncontroversial emergency nature, we're deciding to have a vote right after the second reading.
Thank you.
Are there any other comments or questions on item B, the update to policy 006.1? Mrs. Allen, will you call the roll, please?
Mr. Smith,
Aye.
Ms. Lynch,
Aye.
Ms. Bowman,
Yes.
Mr. Byrd,
Aye.
Mr. Champagne,
Aye.
Mr. Jankowski,
Aye.
Dr. Levinson,
Aye.
Dr. Munson,
Aye.
Dr. Bacher.
Aye.
9 ayes.
Motion passes. Next on the agenda is a legislative report. Mr. Jankowski.
Yes, there's not much to report since our last meeting. The Senate is in session this week, but there's really no education-related bills in the committees this week. They're really focusing on state closure issues and reopening of the counties. The House is in recess this week. They reconvene next week for 3 days, and then the last week of May they'll be in session for 2 days. However, on April 27th, as Ms. Winch alluded to earlier during our meeting, the House State Government Committee did approve 2 House bills, both of which include provisions that would freeze school property tax rates for the 2021 season or school fiscal years. They have not been voted on in the House yet. However, they will most likely within the next couple of weeks be discussed on the House floor. The bills were approved in committee along party lines, so it's going to be interesting to see what happens when it goes to the full House. As you know, the House and Senate are both Republican controlled. The Republicans are very much in favor of a school tax freeze, as they believe that the school districts are not in dire straits, rather that they believe that there are savings being incurred by realized by the schools, whereas the Democrats believe that that taxes are a necessary avenue to help schools generate income during these troubled times. So the thought in Harrisburg right now is that the bill will, one of these, if not both bills, will pass the legislature. The question is what will happen when it gets to Governor Wolf's desk, and whether or not he will veto it, and if he does, whether or not enough votes will be available to override that veto. So that of course is of interest to all school districts, and more to come. There's not really much more to report on that. What may be of some interest to you is I did receive the fund revenue report for the government for April, and the general fund revenue was almost 50% less than anticipated for April in the state. The reason for that is largely because of extended tax deadlines, as you know, for filing of personal income taxes. The state does and personal income tax, because of the large amount of job losses that have been experienced. The state Department of Revenue does believe that they should be able to recoup most of that shortfall once taxes payments do occur during the fiscal year, but that's to be determined. So that's all I have to report right now from Harrisburg.
Thank you, Mr. Jankowski. Are there any questions or comments on the legislative report? Okay, moving on to appointment of treasurer. May I have a motion?
Ziad Munson, so moved.
Adam
I'll
Smith,
second.
second.
Is that Naomi seconding?
Oh, this was Elisa. I tried to give the original motion, but Ziad beat me. So then I said I would settle for giving a second.
Okay.
We can rock, paper, scissors if you want.
Okay, is there any discussion on the motion? Mrs. Allen, will you call the roll?
Ms. Lynch,
An emphatic yes.
Ms. Bowman,
Yes.
Mr. Byrd,
Yes.
Mr. Champagne,
Aye.
Mr. Jankowski,
Yes.
Dr. Levinson,
Aye.
Dr. Munson,
Aye.
Mr. Smith,
Aye.
Dr. Bacher.
Aye.
9 ayes.
Motion passes. Moving on to announcements. We had an executive session before this meeting at 7 p.m. Where we discussed litigation and negotiations. As discussed earlier, we'll have a special board meeting on Tuesday, May 26th at 7:30 p.m. It will likely be another virtual meeting. And our next regularly scheduled board meeting will be on Monday, June 8th at 7:30 also. With that, I will now entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved. Elisa Bowman.
Was there a second?
Second, Jeff Jankowski.
Who wants to go?
Ms. Allen, will you call the roll, please?
Ms. Bowman,
Yes.
Mr. Byrd,
Aye.
Mr. Champagne,
Aye.
Mr. Jankowski,
Aye.
Dr. Levinson,
Aye.
Dr. Munson,
Aye.
Mr. Smith,
Aye.
Ms. Lynch,
Aye.
Dr. Bucker.
Aye.
9 ayes.
The meeting is now adjourned. Thank you very much.